Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmerced.com. And what I want to talk about today is just sort of the idea of a pandemic, the idea of sort of in a libertarian world, kind of how do these kind of things get dealt with, what's kind of wrong with the way we're dealing with them now, etc. Because basically you have a lot of people who look at some of the failures in the efforts across the world to deal with the coronavirus outbreak and say, see, well, luckily we weren't in charge by libertarians, we wouldn't have done anything. And this just kind of exemplifies a misunderstanding of what libertarians want, okay? Wanting government to do less doesn't mean wanting nothing to be done. These are two different things, okay? It's from a libertarian's point of view, things can be done by a very diverse, rich, not just individuals, but by different institutions, different organizations, and all of them have different incentives, governance structures, etc. And one large centralized institution tends to have sort of bad governance, top heaviness that makes it harder to handle these things. And that's exactly what we've seen in the sense where, and this is not all just because Trump is Trump. I mean, this is also just sort of the nature of government, that there's a lot of bureaucracy that prevents a lot of the steps that need to be taken from being taken quickly. Okay, government is just not good at doing things in general, but especially not doing things quickly. Okay, and everyone focuses on the idea of preparedness, but there's a lot of aspects of this beyond preparedness, such as prevention. Okay, but let's just think about it. Okay, there's different steps in sort of how this outbreak happens. So first thing is first, there is the whole idea of just being able to diagnose the test. And one of the issues in the U.S. is that tests weren't available. And part of that is because of the bureaucracy to make certain medical procedures available. And two, for some reason, there was a bureaucratic approach to sitting there where tests had to be approved. Instead of just giving medical professionals the ability to test and for allowing different types of tests and new types of tests to be fast-tracked, to be available for testing, there was just sort of this slowdown and this sort of bureaucratic slowdown. And, if you had pure market incentives, I mean, let's think about it. If you are a medical company and there is this huge demand for testing for a particular disease, okay, that's an opportunity. And that profit motive, or just, would have created several different firms that want to basically pursue that opportunity, to pursue that demand. And they would have done it so as quickly as possible because the opportunity is there. Again, in today's world where there's a lot of regulations on medical companies, a lot of processes they have to go through, those incentives are dampened. And then again, you'd have competition. So, if someone came out with not the best test, another test that works better would quickly, get the word out. Maybe competition, all that stuff. So there's that aspect of it. And that's sort of one of the benefits of sort of the market process is that, when there's a demand, they're going to fill it. If there's a demand for testing, if there's a demand for treatment, if there's a demand for dealing with the problem, someone's going to want to fill it because that's an opportunity. The problem is you have so many different points where people have to ask permission, and government isn't quick to scale up or scale down. So in a situation like this, this is why people sit there and say, well, Donald Trump, should have been more prepared, assuming that the government should have scaled up much earlier, which I guess, if you're going to scale up, you have to scale up over time in government because it's so bureaucratic. But that also means you're just wasting more resources because you are having to pay the costs of that higher scale much earlier during times where it's unnecessary. While smaller institutions that are less bureaucratic, whether it's a community organization, local governments or local governing institutions, insurance companies, whatever, they're just a lot more nimble. Okay, so you're using resources more efficiently. You're not tying up so many resources at any one moment, or they're only tying up what's needed because they want to be prepared, but they don't want to over-prepare either. And also they create new incentives to prevent. Okay, so in a world where, maybe a lot of this intervention and regulation doesn't exist, there's still liability. Okay, people are going to still, there'll more than likely be some sort of emergent legal system. So I'm saying, hey, you know what, even if the government didn't provide the legal system, there's a demand for such a thing. It'll come to exist, whether it's through, decentralized chains of arbitration, businesses or whatever. There'll be some sort of method of adjudication. And this means engaging in commerce will have liabilities attached to it, which means those who are engaging in commerce will want to buy insurance. And insurance companies will want to mitigate their risks. And to mitigate their risks, they will impose rules on businesses that want to buy insurance from them. If they impose too many rules, they'll go to a different insurance company. But if they impose too few rules, they'll go out of business because there'll be too many claims. So there's this whole process of trying to discover sort of what's this right balance between rules and the costs of those rules that occurs between all these different vested actors. And this would happen. Okay, so in that case, those rules would oftentimes prevent a lot of these issues, but at the same time, it wouldn't cost so much to enforce these, the rules wouldn't be so burdensome that they cripple the industry that the rules are on. And that's so again, there would be the point is there would be regulation. It would generally come from insurance companies, because insurance companies would be sort of the right people with the right vested interest in overseeing the businesses that they insure and minimizing their liabilities and any inherent risks. I mean, that's the role of insurance companies in a traditional market. Nowadays, that's kind of all, botched, because you have all sorts of protectionism of insurance companies that reduces these incentives for insurance companies to compete heavily, to price risk more aggressively, to, mitigate risks and whatnot. They still do that, just when you make them into state cartels, and you create all sorts of barriers to entry and all these things that happen in the insurance company currently with government policy, that's going to dampen these incentives. But you'd have that, and again, that's going to create all sorts of incentives along the way. Also, absent, a definitive central sort of thing, and then again, that doesn't mean there wouldn't be a central thing. I imagine that when it comes to dealing with like healthcare crises, absent the U.S. government, people would be like, well, we kind of still do want to have some sort of central authority that kind of helps coordinate these things. So let's create one that's separate. And that would be better, because it wouldn't, like the problem right now, when you talk about like the CDC and the FDA, well, the politics of the FDA and the CDC end up being tied into the politics of the military. They end up being tied into the politics of the Department of Education, because it's the same set of people who are at the top and in charge, the same president, the same senators, the same congressmen. And the problem is, every department that's focusing on one thing needs to be dealing with the politics of another thing. Versus if they were separate organizations. So if everyone decided, hey, we're going to pull together our money, or, if every insurance company says, you know what, we do want to make sure that especially if you're a health insurance company, you'll be like, you know what, we want to make sure that this doesn't come and bite us back in the later, and we end up spending all this money later on because a pandemic wasn't dealt with. Maybe we should all kind of jointly form some sort of organization that will coordinate between all of us to make sure these things don't spread widely. And and then again, having people who have insurance contracts with them, they have a lever to help kind of enforce any actions that need to be taken. Okay. But at the same time, the politics don't get mixed in with like military and education. It's purely a health thing, and they're purely measuring, okay, the resources we have available versus the risks that are available. It becomes a pure calculation on that thing. Well, again, right now, it's just everything gets mixed in, and then, okay, well, if I need more resources for education, then I gotta go take them from healthcare. It becomes all this, the trade-offs become too unrelated, too wishy-washy, and that's the problem when you try to put too many eggs in one basket. And all these things have affected the response. Also, having, a lot of these governance happen more locally would be also something that would have benefited greatly, because maybe many of these, even if we're talking about more local governments, whether it's your local state or city government, they probably would have been more able to quickly respond had the expectation been that they were more the focal point for dealing with it, instead of everyone kind of looking to the FDA and the CDC and be like, and then there being this sort of botched and slow response. And again, it's yes, you might be able to put some fault on it with Donald Trump, but it's not. But I can't imagine it would have been that much better had Trump not been the president. because you still don't have the general structure of governance and political incentives doesn't change because you swap who the president is. Okay, so there's incentives. Okay, there are people like when it's these barriers that are sit in the way that have affected the process, not the fact that there was a lack of coordination. And again, a more decentralized network of institutions can respond quicker, and then they can try different things and they can figure out what works faster. And yes, that could mean that some people make mistakes, and then you have some people who don't handle it as well as others. But over time, as people learn what works, more people are going to handle it better than handle it worse. Okay, I mean, just take a look at anything in life. Over time, our accumulated knowledge grows, and then we all benefit from it because, maybe a couple hundred years ago, people didn't know about germs, and everyone just kind of was dirty and constantly died of infections. But as mistakes happen, as things got learned, and we figured out, okay, well, there are things called germs, everyone started acting differently. Now, there's still people who are dirty and die of infections and spread diseases, but the majority of people don't. Majority of people are cleaner because that knowledge is once it exists, transmutes. So the more we're free, the more we can discover new knowledge, and the quicker we can adapt those practices, which is the point. Okay, the point isn't that if everyone's just free, everyone's just going to magically know how to fix everything and figure everything out. It's just that we're going to be in an environment where we're free to figure it out, so we'll figure it out faster because people are trying different things. We figure out what works. That knowledge, travels, and society is able to grow to a better place much quicker. We see that to some effect now in technology and in our daily lives, but it does get dampened when people aren't able to try certain things. You're limiting the level of experimentation. You're slowing down the rate of growth as a society, and that's going to affect our health. That's going to affect our education. It's going to affect everything. So I kind of went all over the place there, but that's basically it in a nutshell. Hopefully you guys found this interesting and enjoying. Again, you can always learn more about libertarianism over there at libertarian101.com. You can learn more about economics at learneconomicsnow.com. And now I have all sorts of stuff on programming and coding, which you can go find at alexmercedcoder.com. Enjoy. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.